Hey, last time we were kind of dealing with the changes in governments and the consolidation of some governments a little bit. And so we're going to dig into that a bit more today. The big thing that we're going to talk about today is sort of this age of exploration. And we have some new things that are going to pop up during the middle 1400s that really allow for European countries to get ready to embark on those voyages of discovery. And first off, we need to kind of acknowledge that this wasn't about just some sort of lofty idea of various European powers wanting to see what's out there. That this was about financial motives, and the big one that European powers wanted at the time were new trade routes to Asia. Uh, they had been trading with Asia for medicines, silks, perfumes, spices, and a myriad of other things. To kind of give you an idea about how much these things, especially spices, were valued, is a lot of time various food spices were literally worth their weight in gold. Uh, so this is extremely serious business. These are very, very desirable goods. The people that traveled to Asia and back again to secure those goods could become extremely, extremely wealthy. Uh, but the big problem is that this was an overland route. You were traveling from Europe all the way through basically the Middle East and down into Asia. And that was, racked with problems. Most of the time, the trade goods were passed from caravan to caravan. So each, party was marking up the trade goods as they passed from one group to another, passing through somebody's territory that was subject to tolls. Also, this was an incredibly lucrative and expensive product, and so a lot of times there would be bandits that were absolutely willing to relieve those caravans of their expensive goods. Um, on top of all of that, there's only so much weight that you can put in a wagon that's, for cargo. You're having to, you know, provide water for your livestock as well as the people that are carrying the goods. You have to provide food for both parties. And so when you're actually, attributing what kind of area in these wagons can actually go to transporting goods, it's not a lot because we're having to provide uh, for food and water to carry these people and their livestock that far. So this was extremely, extremely expensive. It took a long time. It was a huge hassle. And so, as much as possible, European powers wanted an all water route to the Indies as well as Asia. And that's what really sparks this age of exploration. It's this desire to maximize profits ultimately. Um, Earlier, uh, explorers from Portugal, Henry the Navigator, as well as Bartholomew Diaz. Uh, Both of those guys developed a water route around Africa. Unfortunately, for the most of the rest of the European powers, Portugal controlled that route. It had a very strong navy. Navigation tools were not very good, and so it was kind of dangerous to get too awful far out to sea. Uh, we don't really have any navigation tools that allow, shipping to extend very, very far out into the Atlantic Ocean. It's easy to get lost out that way. And so the Spanish wanted to rival Portugal, and we'll get into some issues there later on. But that effort by Spain would ultimately culminate in Columbus's voyage. And so that the desire for maximizing profits is really, really what drives this. There's nothing wrong with maximizing profits, but that's what drives this whole thing. The second event that really allows for exploration is the emergence of large nation states. Prior to the 1400s, most countries in Europe were broken down into kingdoms. We really didn't have sort of a united Spain. We don't really have so much of a united England. France is getting there, but they're not quite there yet. Both the Black Death as well as the Crusades had really decimated a lot of powers of those feudal lords in Europe that allow for them to maintain control. And so, as these various kingdoms get weaker and weaker in Europe, new leaders are going to emerge, and they're going to sort of unite various regions together, and that's where we'll get the modern nation states that we sort of understand. A couple of examples, and you don't have to remember these, but a couple of examples. 1469, Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile marry each other and unite the two kingdoms of Spain. 1453, very shortly after the first wave of the Black Death up in England, Louis the XI is going to emerge from the Hundred Years' War to be the leader of a unified France. Similarly, 1485, Henry VII is going to be victorious in the War of the Roses. So you've got, the Crusades and the bubonic plague and various social upheavals that are going to allow some consolidation of power. The reason that that's important is because, those consolidated governments have more resources to draw from. And so, rather than fighting against each other or just being rivals anyway, the two kingdoms of Spain can consolidate resources and be able to afford to put on these expeditions. Another thing that's really going to contribute greatly to this age of exploration, and some of this happens during the age, and then some of it happens a little bit later, but the development of the printing press. Once that emerges, new techniques, new discoveries can be spread throughout Europe. And so we're not having to reinvent the wheel on new technologies that are going to allow for faster shipping and things like that, and greater navigation. Another thing is there are radical improvements in navigation. In Portugal, the Portuguese are going to develop triangular sails. Those are much faster than square-rigged ships that most people were relying on previously. Since they are faster, a limited amount of food can get you farther. You can travel farther on the same amount of supplies, because that was the limiting factor of a lot of these explorations. You have to be able to feed the crew. If if they're running low on supplies, they're either going to mutiny or at worst die on you. So another development in the area of technology is the sextant. This allows you to determine somewhat your position on the open sea, so you can confidently get farther from land. The sextant allows you to determine where you are north and south on the globe. East-west is going to be a little bit far off. We're going to have to wait for some time period to develop that. And finally, on technology, war material, gunpowder and muskets is going to make securing a lot of these new discovered territory a lot easier. So, we have this desire to go and explore a better route to Asia. We're getting the financial ability, we're getting the technological ability, and so people are going to be able to sort of move that direction. Now, on that, pretty much every historian agrees that Columbus was by no means the first to discover the New World. In the textbook, uh, it discusses that Native Americans had been in the Americas for thousands of years at that point, probably 15,000, upwards of maybe 25,000, depending on which, archaeologist that you're kind of talking to. Unfortunately, we don't really have a solid time frame of when Native Americans either crossed the land bridge up in Siberia or arrived by ocean voyages. But after that, other people visited America after them. Scandinavians arrived in Canada around 1000 AD, so about 500 years before Columbus. There are accounts of Irish and possibly Southern Europeans arriving to the Americas at the same time. There are even some arguments that Africans arrived in South America prior to Columbus. We definitely have some pretty strong indicators that Asian peoples from China, from possibly Japan, arrived along the Pacific coast of what's now the United States. There are stone anchors that have been discovered off the coast of especially Washington that are very, very similar to anchors that were used in China at the time. But none of those people were really credited with discovering America, aside from the Native Americans. None of them, the Scandinavians, the Africans, the Asians, the Irish, nobody really did anything that resulted in a permanent settlement. And they weren't able to really spread the news of what their discovery, their voyages had found. And so it didn't really result in other settlement following them. So conditions really, really weren't right for them at the time to get more people on board. When we see this after Columbus's voyage in 1492, there's all kinds of things that are just lined up for Europeans to really, really take advantage of what's going on. And so Europeans are going to move into the Americas really shortly after, because Columbus did make that voyage, and that was took quite a lot of bravery for people to embark on that. But the conditions that were there in the 1490s, that's really what allowed Europeans to kind of jump on board with what was going on. So that's it. We'll talk at you later.